It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the sunlight streamed lazily through the blinds, and the hum of the neighborhood felt almost like a lullaby. I had just settled into my usual weekend routine, coffee in hand, playlist humming softly, and a stack of groceries waiting on the counter from my online order. Little did I know, my peaceful morning was about to spiral into one of the most absurd encounters of my life. A sharp knock echoed through my apartment. I frowned, checking the clock. It was early for visitors. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Henderson, or as the neighbors had dubbed her, Karen, the infamous HOA enforcer. She looked like she had stormed straight out of a daytime drama, arms crossed, glaring, and clearly bristling with purpose. I hesitated before opening the door, sensing trouble before it even began. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" Her eyes narrowed, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I noticed you ordered groceries again," she said sharply. "And you live alone." She leaned closer, voice dropping conspiratorially. "I have kids. I think it's only fair that you share." I blinked. "Excuse me, share my groceries with you?" My mind raced, trying to process her logic. "I don't think that's how—" No, listen," she interrupted, wagging a finger. "It's about community. You live alone. I have children. It's only right that you distribute some of your food to those who need it more." Her tone had that insistent, self-righteous edge, the one that made it clear she believed she was entirely justified. I laughed nervously. "Mrs. Henderson, I can't just— These groceries were paid for, and I don't even know what your kids like." She huffed, clearly unimpressed with my excuses. "That's not the point. You live alone. You clearly have excess. It's community responsibility." By now, I was inching back into my apartment. Something felt off, like this wasn't just a neighborly request, but a power move, a way to assert dominance under the guise of morality. I had heard stories of her antics before: arbitrary fines, unwarranted complaints, and general chaos for anyone who crossed her HOA radar. But this, demanding groceries, was a new low. As I tried to reason with her, her volume escalated. Voices from the hallway started to gather. A few neighbors peeked out, whispering, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. One of them pulled out their phone, presumably to record the spectacle. The presence of witnesses didn't seem to faze her. If anything, she straightened her posture, eyes flashing with defiance. Before I knew it, she stepped onto my doorstep uninvited, reaching for a grocery bag, and I had to step in to block her. "Please, you can't just take my things," I said firmly. "I'm calling the authorities if you don't step back." Her expression hardened. "Oh, you'll regret this. The HOA will hear about this." Little did she know, this was about to escalate far beyond HOA complaints. I stepped back, my heart racing. Mrs. Henderson didn't. Instead, she planted herself firmly in my doorway, arms crossed like a general claiming territory. "You think you can ignore community rules?" she snapped, her voice echoing down the hallway. "I have kids. That makes me more important than someone who lives alone." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mrs. Henderson, living alone doesn't give anyone the right to demand my property. These groceries are mine, and you are trespassing." That seemed to provoke her even more. Her face flushed crimson, and she started pacing across my small entryway. "Trespassing," she spat. "I am enforcing HOA ethics. This is about fairness. You hoard while others—" "While others what?" I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I shop, I pay, and I bring groceries inside my own home. That is how things work." She waved her hands dramatically, like she was delivering a court case instead of talking to her neighbor. "No, you're selfish. You think just because you live alone, you don't have responsibilities toward the community." I realized at that moment that words weren't going to sway her. She wasn't rational. She was performing a self-important crusade. That's when I reached for my phone and carefully started dialing 911. Her eyes narrowed like she had noticed my move. "You wouldn't dare," she said, stepping closer. "The HOA will—" "Step back," I said firmly, holding the phone up. "I am asking nicely for the last time." Her expression twisted, a mixture of disbelief and fury. In a split second, she lunged toward the groceries, grabbing a bag. I reacted immediately, grabbing it from her hands. She struggled, trying to wrench it back, yelling that I was violating community rules. My neighbors were now gathered in the hallway, some whispering, some holding their phones out to record the confrontation. Then something shifted. She grabbed my wrist and I shouted, "Let go!" That was when the first responding officer arrived. 2 patrol cars had pulled up outside after a neighbor called earlier when they saw her aggressive behavior. The sight of the police seemed to freeze her in place for a split second, but it was clear she wasn't ready to surrender. She started protesting loudly, claiming the HOA had given her the right to enforce sharing rules, and that I was denying children their due. The officers exchanged glances, then asked her to step outside. She refused. Her protests grew louder, echoing through the building. I could hear murmurs from other neighbors, some laughing nervously, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Eventually, after multiple warnings, the officers physically guided her toward the elevator. She continued shouting about community responsibility and living alone privileges, completely ignoring that she had crossed the line into criminal behavior. I stood at my doorway, shaking slightly, holding my groceries, realizing that my quiet Saturday had just turned into a scene straight out of a reality show. She had overstepped every boundary imaginable, and the authorities were handling what I could never have predicted. Even then, I couldn't help but think, what on earth would happen next? By the time the officers escorted Mrs. Henderson to the patrol car, the hallway had transformed into a scene of whispers, shaking heads, and a few stifled laughs. My neighbors were either recording the incident or offering sympathetic glances. I could feel my pulse slowly returning to normal, though my hands still shook slightly as I clutched the grocery bags. The officers returned to me, one giving a polite nod. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, still processing. "She's being arrested for trespassing and harassment. You did the right thing by calling us before it escalated further." I exhaled a long breath, realizing how quickly a normal day could spiral out of control. I just didn't know what to do," I admitted. "She showed up out of nowhere, demanding my groceries because I live alone. I mean, who even does that?" The officer gave a small, understanding shrug. "You'd be surprised. People sometimes think HOA rules give them authority far beyond their rights. She crossed the line. Physically taking your property is illegal." As they drove away with her, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the silence wash over me. It was surreal. Just hours ago, I had been excited to unpack my groceries, not deal with a neighborhood feud that ended in an arrest. I glanced at my groceries, half in disbelief, half in amusement. Life was truly unpredictable. Later that day, I received a few text messages from neighbors checking in. Some were supportive, some curious, and a couple even admitted they had witnessed smaller, unsettling incidents with her in the past, but never had the courage to speak up. One neighbor joked, "I guess the HOA meetings will never be the same after this." I laughed softly, the tension easing slightly. But the legal consequences weren't over. The HOA board sent an official email to all residents, noting that Mrs. Henderson had been removed from any position of authority pending investigation. They reminded everyone that while community involvement was encouraged, no one had the right to demand personal property or trespass. I spent the rest of the day trying to return to normalcy, unpacking groceries, making lunch, and even playing some music to lighten the mood. But my mind kept wandering back to the absurdity of the morning. Who really thinks they can enforce sharing based on living situations? And more importantly, why had she picked me? By evening, the adrenaline had faded, leaving a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. I knew it would take time for the neighborhood to settle back into routine, but one thing was certain. Mrs. Henderson's arrest had sent a clear message. No one, no matter how self-righteous, was above the law. As I sat down with a cup of tea, I reflected on the day's events. I had survived an overbearing HOA nightmare, stood my ground, and even had witnesses to back me up. It was exhausting, surreal, and slightly embarrassing, but also empowering. Somehow, in the chaos, I felt more confident about protecting my boundaries than ever before. And I had a feeling that the next chapter in this story, both for me and for the infamous Keran, was just beginning. The following week felt like a strange combination of relief and lingering tension. Mrs. Henderson's arrest had become the topic of quiet gossip and cautious amusement in the neighborhood. Some residents were hesitant to speak openly, still wary of retaliation, but others seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to her antics. I went about my daily life cautiously, knowing that HOA drama could flare up at any time. For a few days, every unexpected knock or sudden ring of the doorbell made my heart skip. But gradually, the normal rhythm of my life returned. I unpacked groceries without fear, went on walks around the neighborhood, and even allowed myself to laugh at the absurdity of the events. The HOA board, under pressure from the community and local authorities, held a meeting to review the situation. They outlined the boundaries of authority clearly. No resident, regardless of their position in the HOA, could demand personal property or enforce their own moral code. It was a formal, almost bureaucratic reassurance, but it carried weight. Even those who had felt powerless before seemed emboldened. A few neighbors came by to check in, offering a mix of congratulations and empathetic laughter. One neighbor whispered, "I can't believe she actually tried to take your groceries. That's next-level Keran behavior." I laughed, shaking my head. "I know, right? I just can't believe it escalated all the way to arrest." Despite the humor, there was a serious lesson in the chaos. I realized how important it was to set clear boundaries and stand firm when someone oversteps. I had worried initially about confrontation, about making waves in the neighborhood, but failing to act could have made the situation much worse. Calling the authorities wasn't just a safety measure, it was an assertion of my rights and my autonomy. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson's arrest served as a cautionary tale. Rumors circulated that she would face charges for trespassing and harassment, and that her HOA privileges had been suspended indefinitely. Even those who had previously defended her cautious approach now seemed to agree. No matter how zealous, personal boundaries and the law could not be ignored. Sitting in my kitchen one evening, sipping tea and enjoying the quiet, I reflected on everything. What had begun as an ordinary Saturday morning grocery delivery had turned into a full-blown ordeal, a reminder that self-righteousness unchecked can become dangerous. At the same time, it showed the strength that comes from standing up for oneself, calmly but firmly. In the end, I unpacked the last grocery bag, smiled at the absurdity of it all, and thought about how much had changed in just a few days. The neighborhood would remember the infamous Keran incident, but I had learned something more personal. Asserting your rights isn't rude, it's necessary, and sometimes it can even prevent chaos. And as I sat back enjoying the quiet, I realized that I had turned an invasive, stressful situation into a story I could own. One that ended with justice, lessons learned, and a little bit of neighborhood legend. Enjoying this wild HOA story? Hit that subscribe button to catch more real-life neighborhood drama. Give this video a like if it shocked or entertained you, and drop a comment below. What would you have done if a neighbor demanded your groceries?